Like a lot of people with focal epilepsy, I experience more than one seizure type. Normally I'll wake up during the night and my arm and leg will raise and then start shaking, and that lasts 20 seconds or so until the seizure stops. And, I'm awake, so I can see my arm and leg moving. Immediately after the seizure, I'm still quite aware, although my left-hand side of my body might be a bit weak.
A convulsive seizure is where the seizure activity that begins as an electrical storm in the brain has spread throughout the brain. And when that occurs, this electrical storm results in what we term a convulsion or a tonic-clonic seizure. This seizure begins with the person becoming very, very stiff. There's expulsion of air, often they'll stop breathing at that point. And then we see clonic movements, which are these jerky movements. Nearly all tonic-clonic seizures last less than a couple of minutes. They pose a significant risk, even short-lived ones, because they can occur anywhere, so there can be injury through the falls. During these convulsive seizures, people stop breathing. They often go blue, and almost invariably the breathing starts up again, but rarely there may be problems with breathing after the seizure, and that can result in sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, so they're not without risk.
A few years ago, I started having what are called clusters of seizures, and this is where the seizures start and then stop and continue without really entirely stopping. It got to the point where we needed to call an ambulance, and they arrived, gave me intravenous medications to terminate the seizure, and eventually it calmed down and I went into hospital. And since then, I've had a couple of times when this has happened, and I've been admitted to intensive care because the seizures wouldn't terminate after being given the intravenous medication. And then eventually, after I think the second time, I was discharged with some rescue medication, which has been really valuable in trying to control these occurrences when they have done since then.
We know that this rescue medication, if given, can prevent the progression, can stop the seizures. They reduce the necessity for calling out ambulances, and they reduce the necessity for admission to hospital, and they improve the overall prognosis. In a study that we did and published in 2016, we found that since rescue medication has been introduced in the UK, which is really over the last 25 years, we've seen a decrease in the mortality associated with status epilepticus. And that's not because status epilepticus is being treated better in hospital, it's because we're preventing people going into status in the community, or at least we're ameliorating the seizures before the person gets to hospital.
The difference effective seizure management makes is massive. It changes from me having a very disturbed sleep, say 5 or 6 seizures regularly throughout the night, making my sleep terrible, to me maybe only having 2 or 3 seizures relatively early in the morning. And that enabling me to have that kind of block of sleep is really important for work and life in general. The times when I've had seizures in public, people have always been very helpful. Almost a more problematic situation for me is when I'm alone, because if I start to have a repetitive seizures or status epilepticus there, then I don't have any help. Knowing that I can have seizures which don't terminate by themselves has had quite a big impact on my confidence doing some activity. If I have to travel, this is probably the biggest problem, because I need to have my wife with me effectively to be able to give the rescue medication, at least if I've recently had some problems with my epilepsy.
The first thing that a caregiver needs to know is when to call the emergency services when a seizure is an emergency. It's often very upsetting for patients if the ambulance is called for every seizure that they have, because most seizures are very short-lived. So they need to know that if a seizure lasts longer than usual or is repetitive, then an ambulance needs to be called.
Act fast,
Stop seizures.
save lives.